It is okay. The way it is raining, it's a bit uncertain.
Yes, the rate at which it's raining is difficult to predict.
So shall I start or?
They've started the promo.
Okay. So hello and welcome everyone to the fourth day of the workshop 𝗦𝗂𝗵 for Scientists, organized by IISER Kolkata and in collaboration with 𝗤𝗍𝗄, which is sponsored by DST under the କାର୍ଯ୍યશાળા scheme. So today we have with us eminent scientist Dr. Soumitro Banerjee, and he is famous for his seminal contributions in the field of nonlinear dynamics and chaos theory. He received the prestigious 𝗕𝗵𝘆𝗀𝗵𝗀 Award for his work in developing the bifurcation theory for switching dynamical systems. He is currently a professor at IISER Kolkata, and today he will be talking about communicating science to the masses. So over to you, Professor Banerjee. And if you have any questions, feel free to write in the chat box, and I will take it up at the end of the session. Okay.
Thank you very much. I have been listening to the talks that have happened so far in this program, and many things that I wanted to say have already been said by other speakers, and so I'll not repeat those. And due to that reason, my talk may be shorter than what I initially planned. So let us start. Scientific communication for the masses. Many of my earlier speakers have spoken about why is it necessary. And Professor 𝗂𝗍𝗵𝗍𝗿 has very forcefully made the point that the science we do are supported by the government money, which is effectively public money. So the vegetable vendor in the market, the person on the street that we meet in the bus, people like that, they are the people who are actually supporting our science. In fact, thanking the government for it will be similar to thanking the ATM for giving me the money. So it is actually the people who are supporting our science, and naturally we have an obligation. We have a responsibility to give back. And that giving back can be in the form of educating them regarding science. And so reaching out to the masses is a responsibility, is an obligation. We have to do that. He has made the point very forcefully. But I feel there is another aspect to it. It is even for our self-interest that we need to do science communication. Self-interest means, see, we are scientists. Naturally, it is to our self-interest to see that science flourishes. The scientific community does well, and we are able to contribute meaningfully to the world of knowledge. That is our own interest, the scientific community's interest, not an individual's. And if you look at it very carefully, you will notice that the way a river has a catchment area, the area from which water goes into a river, in the same way, institutional science also has a catchment degree. The students come from the society at large. They are the children of the person on the street. They are the children of the fishmonger. They are the children of the people in the bank. So there are people out there, and their children are our inputs. Now, if these children do not have a conducive atmosphere for the cultivation of science in their homes, then it is not conducive to the health of science either. And how does one develop a thought process? We develop the thought process through the interaction with the outside world, the society. We develop our thought process from our childhood through interaction with our parents, with our friends, with our teachers in the school, and also radio, TV, and internet, all that put together give me the input, or give those children the input from which, culling from which, they develop their own thought process. And if that thought process is not scientific, they, in the future life, unless they can be trained to completely change their way of thinking, they cannot really become good scientists. That's the point I'm making, that it is important, in order to become a good scientist, it's important to acquire a scientific bent of mind, a rational bent of mind, logical faculty. And if that faculty is obtained in the childhood from the rest of the society, then that person has a larger, higher probability of becoming a successful scientist, because that is what we count on: our logical faculty, our rationality, our scientific way of thinking. And so that is why the scientists have to reach out to the people, because their homes are the cradles for the next generation of scientists. And in order for science to flourish, that catchment, that input to our system, have to have certain grounding. Not grounding in science, grounding in the thought process. And that is why it is very important for us scientists to convey that thought process to the rest of the society. Now we have to be alive to the issue that the rest of the society, the dominant way of thinking in the rest of the society is not scientific. In the medieval period, the way of thinking was believe, don't question. While science's way of thinking is question, don't believe. Look at the people around you. What is their way of thinking? Still, it is believe, don't question. Something has been believed by generations, and therefore I believe. Something has been believed by my forefathers, therefore I believe. I don't question. This is the way still prevalent in the society. And the students come to us imbibing that way of thinking, which is completely antithetical to the scientific way of thinking. So, therefore, in our institutions, the task of educating the students is not just conveying the ideas of science, Newton's theory, Einstein's theory, Darwin's theory, all that. That is not the only thing. We also have to convey the way science teaches us to think. And that becomes very difficult if the process involves complete 180-degree turning around their way of thinking. So that's why I am making the point first, that it is necessary to do this outreach, go out to the people, talk about science, mainly in our interest, in the interest of science of the country. Not just as an obligation. Yes, there is an obligation, but in addition to that, science in the country cannot flourish unless a majority of the people adopt a scientific way of thinking. That does not mean they have to know the abstract theories of science. No, that's the way of thinking, the rational, logical bent of mind. So that is what we need to communicate to the people. Now, when we talk about communicating science to the masses, then we have to first understand who are the masses. Masses would definitely comprise the people on the street, the lay people, people who have been deprived of an opportunity to learn science to the extent, to any reasonable extent. That is one part of the masses. There's another part who are now being educated in schools and colleges. They are also the masses. So the students in schools and colleges, they are also part of the masses, and we have to communicate that to them. The fact is that they are going through an educative process. They are now learning the different theories and other things in the science textbooks. But still, on an average, you will find that they are not getting a scientific temper, a scientific bent of mind through that process. And this is a problem of our education system. Through our education system, we tell them what has been found by science regarding the various properties of matter, various laws governing nature. We tell them that. But through that, somehow they do not get a scientific bent of mind. Why? Because at no stage in the educative process do we tell them an elementary thing that science rests on. Namely, don't believe anything unless you have evidence. That is a basic tenet of science on which all science rests. But throughout the educative process, the student never learns that. They learn about Archimedes' principle, they learn about the angle subtended in a triangle is 180 degrees, they learn about Newton's theory, they learn about Lavoisier's discovery, all that they learn, all right. But at no stage we tell them, don't believe unless you see any evidence. And this mindset of believing and not questioning, not seeking evidence is not just reflected in the way they do science, that's reflected in the entire thought process. So if that entire thought process is built that way, that will definitely be reflected in the way they do science in the later years. So we need to convey to the students also the way science teaches us to think. And unfortunately, the scientists themselves, I would say, are also part of the masses to whom we have to reach out. The reason is that it is unfortunate but true that I have been in the scientific community for quite a long time to have gray hairs. So I know, I've mixed with many people. I know that many scientists harbor various types of unscientific beliefs, even superstitions. How did that happen? Even though they are in the thick of science, happened because in the whole educative process, they have only learned the tools and techniques of science and not the way science teaches us to think. And naturally, it is also necessary for us to reach out to our friends, the scientific community, and convey. I remember some 20 years back, I read an article in 𝗕𝗏𝗏𝗏 𝗦𝗰𝗶𝗏, a prominent Bengali daily. Probably the author was Arup Ratan Roy, a journalist. What he did was he went to the different scientific institutions, the university departments, and he spoke to professors, researchers, PhD students, and the result of that was reported. And what was reported was quite eye-opening for me, because he said that I see many university departments in which very eminent professors with rings in their fingers, and if you ask them, why are you wearing these rings, and he would say that it is in order to cast the influence of this planet, that planet. Somebody would say that, somebody would say that no, my mother gave it and I don't want to hurt her. All that put together is essentially indicative either of an unscientific bent of mind or a compromising tendency. We compromise with unscientific conduct. Not only that, in that article it was also reported that there are many scientists who ask their students, it was reported by the PhD students, who ask their students to pray before performing an experiment so that the experiment comes successful. There were faculty members who asked their PhD students to pray before submitting their PhD thesis so that it's accepted, and so on and so forth. All these are indicative of a deeper problem we have in the scientific community today. So I would include among the masses not only the people on the streets, as if we are looking from a top at a higher pedestal and looking at people to communicate our science to. We really need to look at our levels also, and we need to talk about how science teaches us to think. We have to engage with them. Now the question is then, if you have identified who we convey that science to, who are the masses? Scientific communication to the masses, who I have identified as 3 categories. Obviously the same communication methodology or the content of communication will not be apt for all the sections. We have to choose, and therefore I need to discuss for which section, which mode of communication will be apt. So let us start with the masses. Masses means I will assume that those who are now not learning science, who are right now not scientists or science students, the people on the street. Some of them are illiterate. Some of them went to school but went up to some level and then dropped off to do something else. And some of them went to some level but presently they are not. So all that put together are the masses out there. Now a lot has been said regarding how to convey our own research areas to them, to the masses, and how to de-jargonize, how to reach out to them, how to put things in a language that they would understand. Fine, that is okay, that's what we should do. But according to me, talking to a vegetable vendor regarding the mass of tau neutrino, yes, we can surely do that, and we may practice adopting appropriate language so that they do understand, but will that have much what do I say? Will that have much impact? The person on the street, their main problem is not regarding information. Their main problem is regarding the way of thinking. So effectively, or the existence of various unscientific thoughts and beliefs in them. So our objective of the science communication to the masses should be to give them an idea regarding how science teaches us to think. And that should be communicated to the students also, but in the mean. Now there are areas which are sort of cradle of their superstitions or belief systems. They have various wrong ideas and therefore they believe things, and there are areas which are sort of hotbeds of these wrong ideas. The most important is the sky. The things in the sky, the planets, the sun itself, the moon, the planets, they move in peculiar ways. Why do they move in peculiar ways? Is it that they are influencing our lives? Is it that my son's examination, whether he will pass or not, depends on what the position of the Jupiter and the moon? These are the questions they have. And naturally, the scientists have to reach out to them to give a proper idea about the things in the sky. And in this, I believe that catching hold of a superstition and countering the superstition may not always be the right idea. Rather, giving them the right knowledge regarding those objects, if you really talk to them regarding what the Mars is, what is it made of, and the fact that we can calculate its orbit. If we watch the Mars at some point of time today, I can calculate and tell where Mars will be a year from now. So there is the motion is not shrouded in mystery. If we can convey these ideas, what is the Jupiter made of? That there are some gas giants, there are some rocky planets, and so those ideas, nowadays we have pictures of these planets, their surfaces, and if you convey that arouses a lot of interest, but at the same time, it arouses questions in them. Whatever we have believed so far regarding the planets, are they true? So this is one important area. For example, a lot of superstitions are centered around eclipses, because nobody has told them what really eclipses are. So eclipse, the transit of Venus, these are events that can be productively used in order to arouse their interest in solid astronomy. And the more they understand astronomy or the facts about the things in the sky, the more their unscientific ideas regarding astrology and other things go away. Everybody has questions. It is quite natural. And if these questions are not answered in a scientific way, see, mind does not like, the way nature does not like a vacuum, the mind also does not like a vacuum. If the question is not answered in a scientific way, it will be answered in an unscientific way. The mind of the people out there will seek out an unscientific answer from the ideas going around in the society. And many of these questions that they have concerns the question of origin of Earth, origin of life, origin of the solar system, origin of the universe, origin of our galaxy, origin of man. So many of these questions concern origins. And if these questions are not answered in a scientific way, as I said, unscientific answers, imaginary answers, somebody thought it that way, that kind of answers will definitely go to them and they will believe, because the idea in the society is more to believe than to question. So it is a responsibility of scientists to convey those ideas to them. Do you know how life formed on this planet? So if you do not give that idea, it will definitely be some kind of a imaginary idea regarding somebody planted life on the planet. So origin questions are important. Now there are some prevalent superstitions, and we need to reach out to them in order to counter those. You see, every now and then we hear of some superstition. A few years back, there was some superstition in this district, that means in the Nadia district and in the Superstitions district, where people were dunking in a muddy pond, believing that will cure them of various diseases. sometimes when you cut banana plants, there is a bit of concave surface and water accumulate there, and it was believed that that water is sent by somebody, and people were flocking to get those. It is believed that the disease called jaundice is called by something yellow, and people put a garland. Some those who claim to be trained of diseases, they put a garland, and as time progresses, the garland sort of increases, and after some time it goes down. And when it goes down, they say that now your yellow thing has gone. So these kind of superstitions are there in the society. And in the western part of Bengal and many other parts, there is the witch kind of ideas. People identify some old lady as a witch. That lady looking at me might cast a aspersion on me, cause me harm just by looking, and therefore kill her. So this kind of superstitions are there, and it is necessary for us to go to the people whenever such superstitions are observed, and to tell them, to give them the correct idea. And many of the unscientific ideas can be countered if you give them a proper idea of the theory of evolution. I've noticed that. You see, in the history of science, science was practically halted, did not make any progress for 100 years or so, because people believed in the fixity of species. So all the species that you see around us were created in one shot, one go, and they have been like that ever since. And when you have that kind of a base idea, then on that basis, science cannot flourish. And science only could flourish, biology could only flourish only after we got an idea of the evolution. As 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗃 has said, nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So the fact that evolution happens, the fact that the things that you see around you, they are also products of evolution, that idea has to be conveyed, that can be conveyed in common man's language, because it's not a very difficult thing. One problem about the theory of evolution is that those who have gone through school, they think that they know evolution. That's one problem. Actually, they don't. The moment you really question them, you realize that they have no clue about the mechanism of evolution. But yes, that's something that I'll talk about when I come to school students. But this is another content that we need to convey to the people. Our problem is that we are often very compartmentalized. If you go to a physicist and ask him to talk about evolution, he says, "This is not my core area, I don't know." If you go to a chemist and ask him to talk about the motion of Jupiter and Mars, he will say, "I don't know about this." So we are very compartmentalized. We have very narrow areas of knowledge. You see, when one is in school, one studies a lot of things, and when one goes to college, the breadth of things that we study becomes relatively narrower. When you go to university, then it becomes even more narrower. If you studied chemistry, at that stage you either specialize in biochemistry or inorganic chemistry or physical chemistry. So it becomes narrower. And when you do PhD, it becomes even narrower. And we are, way beyond the PhD level. So our, vision often has become very narrow. We know that and that only. And therefore, when I'm asked to talk, I can talk about that and that only. This is very bad. The things that I mentioned are elementary things that anybody should know. Shouldn't a mathematician know about evolution? Shouldn't a biologist know about the motion of the planets in the sky? Or shouldn't a mathematician know about how life originated on the planet? At least these elementary understandings we should all have, and we should be able to convey that to the people. But I have a point to make regarding what we should not convey. And that harm is often done by newspaper articles regarding science in the name of science popularization. You see, in science, the way it goes is that we have a question in mind and we try to answer that question by proposing either hypothesis or a postulate, and then there are a large number of hypotheses, then these are tested. When it's tested, ultimately we eliminate the wrong ideas, we home on to the one that we can trust, and that is at some point of time people accept that, okay, this is the answer to that question. When the scientific community as a whole have sort of reached an unanimity about the answer to a question, that is the time to convey that to the masses. But often happens is that somebody has done some work, it is barely out in the journal, and if you reach out to the masses telling that I have done that, you never know whether that will stand scientific scrutiny or not. You do not know whether some other theories can be there to explain the phenomenon or not. So reaching out to the people in an immature stage is rather dangerous. It's rather dangerous because they get a wrong idea regarding science. And so we should convey to them those ideas on which we have more or less reached unanimity regarding the answer to the question. And in that sense, I will rather discourage our colleagues to sort of go to the press whenever you have done some work and shoot that paper onto the press. That's not the right process. Because after it goes to the journal, it is published, and people all over the world then either try to use it or try to replicate the work. And through that process, over a course of time, a sort of idea emerges that that work was correct. And it is only then that it should be conveyed to the people. Regarding the students, this is something that I said regarding what to convey to the public. And how to convey and all that, a lot has been said. And therefore, I will not repeat. I intended to talk about that, but I will not repeat because it has been said already. Regarding the students, those who are in school and college, you'd notice a peculiar phenomenon. The phenomenon is that in the earlier times, as I said, the mode of thinking was believe and don't question. And still today students go with the same idea. Believe, don't question. Believe what? Believe whatever is being taught in the class. Believe whatever is written in the book. So the mode of thinking, the way of thinking style still remains the same. And they do not ask, okay, tell me, why is it true? Tell me, why is the Archimedes principle true? You have told me what the Archimedes principle is, but tell me, why should I accept? Now, this questioning mind is normally countered in two ways. One is, in our culture, we have a sort of submission to the elders. And as a result of that, as a mental habit of that, coming out of that, we also accept whatever are told by the elders. That needs to be countered in order to propagate science. So, since the teacher is elder, teacher is saying something, I should not question that. That is the usual way of thinking in school. And naturally, if you go to a school and simply take a particular book, a particular chapter and ask, tell me, why is it true? How did you become convinced that this is true? You'll find that there is no answer from the students. And most surprisingly, there will be no answer from the teachers also, because they have also been schooled in that kind of environment. And this is something that needs to be broken. And so, I mean, everybody has different ways of communicating science. I also do have. I have been doing that for quite some time. So I also have developed a style of doing that. One thing is that most schools do not have any experimental facilities. So they take the books as the gospel. Whatever are written in the books, they have to understand that, they have to solve the problems, they have to ultimately write that in the exams. So that's how the whole education system runs. And experiments are practically never done in most schools. Elite schools, I'm leaving out of this consideration, but most government schools, you will find practically no facility of experiments. And there are experiments written in the books which do not need any facility. For example, in class 7, it is taught that air has pressure. And in the textbook, there is an experiment described that you take a glass of water, full of water. It is written there. It has to be full to the brim with water. And you put a postcard on it. And you put it upside down, remove your hand, and it will not fall. I have noticed to my utter surprise that this experiment, very simple experiment that anybody can do, is practically never done in the class. Teachers never do in the class. And students never do that going back home. As a result, that particular phrase that the glass has to be full to the brim, that is memorized by students. They're written in the exams. And I have even seen situations where a student failed to write that and marks were cut. Which means that neither the student nor the teacher has ever experimented with glass half full. And if you really do that experiment with the glass half full, you will find that it doesn't fall. So the point that I'm trying to make is that doing these experiments that are at least the ones that are very simple to do, that can be done with not very elaborate apparatus, they should be done. And unfortunately, our system of education has become such that these are not done. And therefore, we need to go to the students and show these experiments, simple experiments, not very, we professors often have the tendency of showing the experiments that look like magic. Oh, no, I'm not talking about that. The things that they study in the class, those things illustrated by experiments with the idea that do not believe unless you see it happening with your own eyes. You see it happening, I'm performing the experiment for you, you come and do the experiment yourself, and then accept that. Don't accept otherwise. This idea needs to be concrete. And even the fact that science does not accept anything without evidence can be conveyed in various ways. For example, when I was in IIT Kharagpur, I suppose it was 1996 at that time, there was a total solar eclipse. And we went to schools in relatively farther areas, and we gave talks about eclipses. So I went to a school. It was in the subdivision Sabang, quite far, about 2.5 hours from Kharagpur IIT. And there we were in a school. The school teacher had invited us to give the talk, and I explained why the eclipses happen and things like that. And then the question came that should you throw away your food during the eclipse? That's what is believed. I mean, that's what is done. Everybody does that. So I said that, does anybody know why you should do that? Or does anybody have a reason why you should do that? And one fellow shot his hand. Yes, I know. My uncle told me that. What is that? So during the eclipse, the bacteria and virus becomes, they grow. And that is why you have to throw them off. I said, wonderful. Now, my style of handling situations like this is always that I ask them to propose an experiment by which they can test that idea, whatever is said. So whenever I go to a school, I always toss around various things and then say that, okay, I have said this, now propose an experiment to test that idea. And here the student said something, I said that fine, wonderful. Propose an experiment to test that idea. And there was silence. Nobody has ever heard of an experiment being proposed by class 8 and 9 students. But then, surprisingly and interestingly, one small fellow raised his hand. He said that, okay, probably I can think of something. I said, what? This is what he said. He said that on the day of the eclipse, I'll ask my mother to prepare dal. And then I'll divide the dal into two bowls. And I'll keep one bowl out in the open. And I'll cover the other bowl in such a way that the dal will not know that eclipse is happening. His language. His language was that dal will not know that eclipse is happening. And after the eclipse is over, I will take a drop from here, I'll take a drop from there, and examine under the microscope whether there is any difference between the number of bacteria. It's a wonderful experiment, thought of by a student. And the reason that he could think of that is somebody told them to think in this line. How can you test? And the moment the idea of that it is a testable statement came, I found that very soon everybody was convinced. So long as a statement remains a statement, believe it or don't believe it, people have a tendency of believing because that's what is conveyed by the society. But the moment they have an idea that this has to be tested, this situation becomes different. There is another thing that for the students, school students, college students, yes, for them, we should convey our research areas. So whenever this discussion happened regarding whether or not we can convey our research areas in a language understandable to them, yes, for them it matters. They will be exposed to the excitement of science. It is necessary. But at the same time, through that, we have to convey to them, our idea should be not only convey the facts and figures, but to convey the method of science, how science works, how science functions, exemplified by my own research area. But the objective that I'm trying to convey is not exactly my research area, it is my example. What I'm trying to convey is that science follows a method. So this is how the research areas need to be conveyed to people. And because our school education system is like that, only facts and figures are conveyed, the worst ever effect has happened in the learning of history. Even though we are not historians, but let me tell you this, that history is also conveyed to them as a collection of events. And they have to memorize when it happened, where it happened, who are the kings and queens, and why should they memorize this? But one thing is typically absent from all textbooks, is that how do we come to know that these are true? How did we come to know that there was one king called Harshvardhan? How do we come to know that there was some civilization called the Indus Valley Civilization? This is never conveyed. And as a result of which, since history is conveyed as a collection of events, if somebody says that no, these are not the events, these are the events, they will accept. Because it is like either believe this or believe that. The believing is up to you, your choice, your liking, disliking. The fact that history is also found in a scientific way, a scientific method works there, that is never conveyed to the students. So the history also becomes a question of belief. For example, when the school textbooks talk about the Indus Valley Civilization, they say that that civilization happened before the Vedic civilization. Fine. Fact conveyed. But how did we come to know that it is really before the Vedic civilization? That is never conveyed to them. And it is not difficult to convey. There are actually 4 clues that scientists found. The fact that these buildings are made of brick, and we do not get a single brick in the whole of the Vedic civilization, not a single brick. There was, large number of references to the horse in all Vedic literature, but we do not see a single relic of the horse in any of the Indus Valley, seals or the bones that are found there. No horse. The Indus Valley people could write. And the Vedic people, at least in the initial years, could not, and that's why things were conveyed in Shruti and Smriti, and only after about 1000 BC, things started being written. So there was definitely a cultural gap between them. And moreover, the pantheon, the gods and goddesses were different. So all these put together, scientists came to the conclusion that, and moreover, you could radio carbon date the timing of the Harappan civilization. So people came to the conclusion, cannot these, something that is said in say 3-4 minutes, cannot these be conveyed to the school in school students? It's never done. So history remains something that is to be believed, and that has disastrous consequences. And it is necessary for us to convey to them what is meant by rational thinking. I'll not go into the details of that, what is meant by rational thinking. For the scientists, I'll not go into the details of that. Definitely, you cannot give a talk telling them what rationality is, what scientific thinking is. They will never listen because they think that they know everything. So it is basically by other means, day-to-day exchange, communication, debates, discussions, that we have to even give this idea to our fellow scientists to get the superstitious beliefs out of their own minds. Otherwise, they will not become good scientists. The form of communication to the people and to the bulk of the school students should be the vernacular medium. And so we need to be able to talk in the vernacular medium, our mother tongue. And I've seen many scientists say that, no, I cannot talk in our mother tongue. Whenever I talk science, I only can speak in English. This is not right. It's a particular mother tongue. Even if you are educated in an English medium school, I was not. I studied in a Bengali medium school throughout. And so I have no difficulty in giving 1 hour talk without uttering a single English word. I have no difficulty, but I understand the difficulty of some people. Do not try to use the Bengali transliterations. Speak in Bengali, but speak in Kannada, speak in Telugu, speak in Malayalam, but use the English words, technical words. For inertia, you do not have to find a technical word for inertia in that particular language. You can use the word inertia, but convey the idea in the vernacular medium. Without that, it really cuts noise. But if you're trying to give a talk to students of another state, yes, then English is the medium. English is the linked language in our country, and so everybody has to be used to that also. I'll not go into the details of it because there is a special session on communication in vernacular medium. Now, I'll say a few words regarding science journalism. In our country, science journalism is rather weak. Most of the newspapers do not have a science journalist as a regular reporter. Only a handful of them have. As a result, the upcoming generation, I'm assuming that I'm addressing students who are now on the way to becoming graduates. I would plead with you, some of them should take science journalism as a career, because that is a gap area. That is a gap area. And if one takes a science journalism and can write good articles, then there is a career for it. It is just that there aren't enough science journalists in the country. I would narrate one experience I had. You see, I have never studied abroad. I have never done even postdoc abroad. I have always done all my work in India, but I have collaborated with people abroad. And for that reason, I have visited countries during the summer vacation. So I stayed for a couple of months or so. So one of those stints was in the University of Maryland, in the Maryland Chaos Group. And the Chaos Group had the habit of, or the practice of having a weekly seminar meeting. It was called the lunch over talk. Every Thursday it used to happen. So we used to contribute. There would be collective ordering of lunch, and we would take the lunch, and at the same time somebody would talk. And I noticed that in that room sat a relatively elderly lady in her 50s. would be sitting at the back and taking notes, never saying anything, just taking notes. So one day I was giving a talk and I was seeing that lady sitting there taking notes, and after the talk, I went up to her and said that, what are you doing? She said that I'm just a journalist of the Washington Post. I said that, could you follow what was happening here? She said, no. I said, then why then do you come every day and every week and sit? She said that not only I sit here, but I sit in the talks of all the groups. I sit there. I said, do you understand? She said, no, not everything. But at least I can figure out if there is something I need to convey to the people. And then if I can spot something, some idea that I need to convey to the people, then I make an appointment with the concerned faculty member. I go to him or her and I try to understand it. I said, what is your background? She said, my background is sociology. I do not know any science, but I know that the people would understand, people out there would understand the extent that I can also understand. And therefore, I can go to a particle physicist, ask about what is the new discovery, and whatever he tells, if I can understand the extent to which I can understand, I can convey to the people. And after that, after having written that, I definitely show the concerned person so that he can check if there is any inaccuracy in writing. But my task is to find out what is new, what is happening in the horizon that will become important later. And a common misconception is that if something is going to impact people's lives, that is interesting. No, it's not always that. Something in cosmology is never going to impact people's life. Whether it's Big Bang theory or steady state theory is never going to impact people's life. It is basically our inquisitiveness about the working of nature, and that's also newsworthy. So the point is that this is a habit that we need to cultivate. Just contrast it with your own habit. Do you go to seminars? Do you go to seminars where you figure that you might not be able to understand? No, this is a habit. You might not be able to understand, but at least you should be able to figure out whether something is being said that is interesting, and I need to know more about it. I need to convey to the people. That is something that needs to be done by those who want to become scientists. I can tell you that unscientific beliefs and superstitions are very prevalent, not only in our country, but also in other countries. There are many states in the United States where evolution theory is taught along with the genesis theory. And people get the idea that it's just another theory. There are states that were, a few years back also, there were states where you could not teach theory of evolution. And it is true that many Americans today believe that evolution is just a theory. I mean, there's no reason to believe in it. So the task is not just in our country, it is also everywhere. But in our country, it is more so because of the prevalence of the unscientific way of thinking. And there is another danger that is coming. That is deliberate propagation of pseudoscience. Something has been said yesterday also, and we can discuss that. Pseudoscience is where you use jargons, you use words, phrases from science to propagate an idea that has nothing to do with science. Now, somebody talked about quantum consciousness. Nobody talked about quantum consciousness before 1920s when quantum mechanics was developed. In a similar way, nobody talked about there being aircraft in the Vedic times before aircraft was invented by modern science. Nobody talked about the head of the Ganesha being implanted on a human torso by plastic surgery before plastic surgery was actually invented. So similarly, people actually grab words, jargons that people would not understand, people out there would not understand. And if you mouth those words, people might think that you know a lot. I'm not only talking about the Nityananda kind of pseudoscience, but there are many who are deliberately propagating such pseudoscience. And the scientists need to actively, vocally oppose this and expose this. If we remain mute spectators while they reach out to the people and talk and propagate pseudoscience, propagate unscientific ideas, then it is the science that suffers, science in general. So my request to all fellow scientists should be vocal. Be vocal in favor of science. And what we need to convey is a way of thinking that science teaches. That is what we need to reach out to the people with. I'll now stop because it's about an hour. I'll now stop, and if there are questions, we can take them. On to Devanaj.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for this talk. I felt that there were echoes of the message of the movie 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝗀𝗀 by Satyajit Ray in your presentation, and there also the protagonist was Soumitro Chatterjee, and this time we have Soumitro Banerjee. So anyway, I would first like to ask the participants if they have some questions. You can either turn on your microphone and ask, or you can put your questions in the chat. So anyone? Okay, I see Arshpreet. Arshpreet, please go on. Or is it Apeksha?
Yeah, I had a question, but if Arshpreet has it, I can go after.
No, I made the mistake. It was you. Please go on.
So it was a great session, sir. Thank you so much. I wanted to know how to approach some adults regarding certain science topics. So I remember an incident talking to my aunt about not throwing food and water after the lunar and solar eclipses, like you mentioned. And she has a master's degree in science, like she is MSc. And like we talked about how eclipses happen because of the movements of the planets and sun and moon. And it's not, it's not good to even, waste food and water because of something that is not directly, something that is not scientifically proven. But in the end, she said that, it would be scientifically proven. She knows about it, but then her mom told her to follow certain rituals, and in turn, her mom told her. So that is a very long kind of a tradition. And even though it is not scientifically proven, she would not want to, like you mentioned, hurt the feelings of elders and all.
Yes.
So how to navigate that, even though people who are educated, they do such things, how to talk to them or try to convince them?
Well, I would not say that I have been successful in this pursuit always, because there are sometimes beliefs that are very, deeply embedded in one's psyche. But you can definitely argue. For example, all that is happening during an eclipse is that the light that was coming, now it is not coming.
Yeah.
Something that happens at night. So do you throw your food at night? You don't. So it's exactly the same that is happening. So that way you can try to convince. But my own experience is that these things work better with relatively younger people, who are more receptive to contradiction to their own established ideas. But as one matures in life, these ideas become so very entrenched, it becomes difficult. But we should try. But basically, the thing is to give the right argument.
Yeah, so like you mentioned about this thing with children, since they are more curious about things around themselves and they are more willing to, say, design experiments, like you mentioned. They are more sort of malleable, but that seems to be a problem with adults.
Yes.
So, yeah. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Anyone else?
Sir, I'm Kevin. So initially I loved the session. So I have a doubt, sir. These days, several scientists and also these science communicators, they brought up this politicization of science news, by the media, with technical details. So the technical details and causing the stories to lack the scientific depth. So rather focusing on the technicalities or focusing on the scientific depth, they are trying to politicize. So this is, I just don't want to create a controversy on, I'm not any party person. So so these days we have been more seeing such kind of news in which, scientists, rather than focusing on the scientific depth of a topic, rather than inculcating scientific temper to the people, they are politicizing that. So, how can, like, so considering myself as a lay audience, how should I take that? Or being a scientist, or an upcoming scientist, being an upcoming scientist, how can I make a change to that, sir?
Well, one thing is that you yourself need to write in the right way, proper way, as you mentioned, going into the depth of things, conveying the right scientific ideas. And if more people write in the right way, then the number of people writing the wrong way, I mean, they also do not get the taste of the right writing. Those who are writing today, they also do not get a taste for the right writing. And if that number increases, that number slowly will go down. But I can tell you one thing, that sometimes this politicization of the scientific ideas happen because certain political groups, fringe groups, are at the heart of propagating some ideas. So if that idea is countered, it will be seen as another political campaign. So I'm not talking about that. I'm saying that whenever there is a propagation of any unscientific idea by whichever interest group it might be, the scientific community should be vocal in countering that. That's my point. And sometimes it might sound like political, because the other idea was being propagated by a political group.
Okay, does that answer your question, Kevin? Okay, I don't hear anything. So anyone else?
So let me provoke Soumitro a bit.
Yes.
We keep having these, hearing discussions that scientists should not be motivated by political beliefs or should not make any comment which is taking sides. Scientists need to remain neutral, and the same for journalists. But somehow we try to make scientists, equivalent to robots, which are not supposed to have feelings and emotions and beliefs. But do you think that is actually possible? And would you say that that is what is, eventually good for the society and even for the benefit of science?
Well, my take on this question is that science is not value neutral. Science does take sides. And if there is a question of taking sides between the truth and falsehood, science does take that side of the truth. And so in general, the answer to your question is that scientists should, again, actively, vocally take the side of the truth. And for that, the scientist also has to cultivate the habit of finding truth in an area that's not his own research area. So that's necessary. But scientists have to take the side of the truth. Now, when you take the side of the truth, that may be against some political dispensation, that may be in favor of some political dispensation. So the scientist should not shy away from that because it is in favor or against some political dispensation. Because scientist's job is to take side of truth. But I'm not saying that it should take this side or that side. Whichever side truth is, take that side. I think this is something that needs to be conveyed. Science is not value neutral. The whole activity of science is to find truth and to stand firmly in favor of truth. And therefore, if some falsehood is propagated by anybody, that needs to be countered, and if that is political, so be it.
Okay, I have a few questions.
Sure.
So yeah, you said that science should follow the truth. Now, there can be debates about what is the truth. So, for example, I can give you an example. You were talking about the theory of evolution.
Yeah.
And you were saying that it is a big, evidence that God should not exist. Something like that, not exactly, but something like that. But in fact, there are many scientists who are trained microbiologists and computer scientists who have an alternate hypothesis. And this hypothesis is about intelligent design. And in this hypothesis, the main idea is that if you have to have evolution, then you have to have like mutations on a very large DNA sequence. And to have the correct mutations, you need a large number of trials. So that means you need to have a very long time of evolution to get to the exact correct kind of mutation that would lead to functional synthesis of proteins. Some people, of course, Richard Dawkins is one of them, who is a propagator of the theory of evolution. He totally debunks this theory. He says that no, it's a pseudoscience. But there are some people who kind of believe that maybe evolution has some gaps, the theory of Darwinian evolution, because there was in history, there was this Cambrian period where in a short range of time, a huge biodiversity was seen. So if you have just random changes in the genetic sequence, then it is very difficult to have this huge biodiversity. So do you have some comments about this?
Firstly, the idea of intelligent design is not new. It even predates Darwin. In fact, in the 1810, I suppose, one Reverend William Paley wrote a book in which he forwarded a very powerful argument that is still being mounted today. His argument was something like this. Suppose you are walking in a forest path and you see a piece of stone lying on the path. It will not raise any question in you because there's nothing unusual about having a stone on the path. But supposing you are walking on a forest path and you see a wristwatch lying on the forest floor, definitely it will raise a question in you, and upon picking it up, examining it, you will realize that it is a very intricate structure. And upon further examining it, you will realize that it has very intricate mechanism. And it is definitely the product of a design. And then he said, if there is a design, there must be a designer. And then he extended that argument to the biological world and said that look around you, all the biological things, all of the living organisms are enormous mechanisms. Their bodies work because of a very intricate design. And if there is a design, there must be a designer. That was his argument. So his argument essentially was the same as today's intelligent design theory. But it has been debunked in various ways by various, for example, a chapter of his book was devoted to the eye. That means he was arguing that the eye is such an intricate design that cannot evolve on its own. Eye is a very intricate design. There is a retina, there is a transparent material, there is a lens in front, and unless that lens has a correct focal length, it will not converge the light onto the retina. All that perfect design. And then the book that you were mentioning, Richard Dawkins' book, The Blind Watchmaker, in which there is a chapter dedicated to that, and he shows that all the intermediate designs, that means all the intermediate design, half a eye, quarter of a eye, one hundredth of an eye, all of them exist in the biological world today. So there are eyes without a lens. There are eyes with only a light sensory spot. There are eyes. So all that are there, and through proper Darwinian evolution, it is possible. We had enough time for that. In fact, about 3 billion years in hand in order to develop such a structure. So the point is that now science believes that the Darwinian mechanism of evolution is sufficient explanation, provides sufficient explanation for the structures that we see in our biological world. But yes, beliefs are hard to go. And if a computer scientist or a geneticist is a believer of this intelligent design theory, then he would find arguments in favor of it. But in general, the consensus among the biologists is that such hypotheses are not necessary in order to explain the structures that we have.
Okay. So Anandarup, you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Please
in fact, it's following up your line of thinking, sir. All bodies of knowledge and understanding, they have principles of truth and just let's say truth ingrained in them, right? So when you said before that we should propagate rationality, if we just propagate rationality without tempering it with empiricism and skepticism, is it not in itself a dangerous thing? Because rationality also exists in things like religion, but it's founded on other sets of truth.
Yeah, when I talked about propagating the method of science, it included logical thinking, it included rationality, it included, you see, science is sometimes said to be organized skepticism, because we do not believe even in the ideas of the great scientists. We always check them, test them. Why? Because we are skeptical. This is one part of the scientific way of thinking. So when I say that you have to convey to them this way of thinking, I included all of them. I especially mentioned rationality because irrational thinking is so very prevalent in our society. But rationality is a component of scientific thinking. You are right. And the other things also need to be propagated. On that, you are right.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I see a question by Shayan. Shayan, would you like to ask your question? Okay, I don't hear from him. Are you there? No. Okay. So what Shayan is asking is, as a student or as a common man, how can science be explained to people who are reluctant to accept science, and so that they understand the discovery of science or scientific thinking for them? Okay, it's not well structured, I guess, but how the main point is, how can science be explained to people who are reluctant to accept science, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, well, science can be explained to them, but that does not immediately guarantee success of the person who is doing the explaining. Because as I said, that some unscientific, irrational belief systems are very prevalent in the society. And if you try to counter that by a scientific argument, it is, it doesn't really happen that immediately people will accept that. No, it doesn't happen. And so what I personally do is that I try to convey, and if I find that a lot of my effort will go wasted, then I sort of focus on those who are more receptive, rather than trying to crack open a hard nut. You got my point? Yeah. So among the people, there are people who believe in things, but still they're open in the mind, so that if you give a proper argument, they would accept. And there are people who would not accept. And I normally do not spend much time on those who would not.
Okay. So there is a question from YouTube by Ida Anandi Mukhya, and so it is basically about what is your take on equalizing the gender bias in science community today?
Well, this is not the topic of discussion today.
Yeah, yeah.
It is it's a different topic of discussion. It is unfortunate that we have a gender imbalance. It is unfortunate, but it has a historical perspective. Earlier, there was practically none.
Okay.
Now we are getting a larger number of women in science, and the number is on an ascent. So let us look forward to a more balanced distribution in future. But you can see that 100 years back, there was no scientist from among the scientific from the women. Now we have. So let's look at it positively. But in order to really promote that, we have to create an environment that is conducive. That is, women also feel at home in the environment of science. And I'll not get into the details of that. There are many aspects to it. Most important being the patriarchal mentality that many of the men have. But I'll not get into the details of that. Today, that's not the subject of discussion.
Okay. So I have a few more questions. For my first question is on the lines of what Apeksha already asked you. So, for example, if you talk about science with for example, say a senior of yourself, and so let us suppose that senior has a strong belief in religion. Now, the very common argument that I have faced and many others have faced is that when I talk about something with a scientific evidence, that person would generally say that this is my own belief. So you have your own belief, but you should not influence my belief. And so also sometimes they would say that, okay, science cannot explain everything. So you cannot influence my belief. So how to counter these kind of arguments?
Firstly, I will not get into the religion issue because that is sensitive. That cannot be done in a short time. And if I try to do that in a short time, maybe I'll hurt sentiments of some, and I'll not do that. I'll only say that science has a way of thinking which says that believe only things that have evidence. Okay. And anything that satisfies that criterion, I'm prepared to believe. That's not a problem. So I'm not really going into the religion debate, but there was another part of your question, that is, it is my belief and it is your belief. And I have my right to my belief, you have a right to your belief. Yes, whenever it comes to a right to believe, you cannot really question that. But whether you believe in truth or you believe in something that is false, you definitely have the responsibility of checking whether you are believing the truth or you are believing somehow the falsehood. So that is something I would like to convey, that yes, you are perfectly allowed to believe whatever you want, but please do check whether the beliefs are correct or not. As somebody said that there's a belief that you have to throw away the food during the eclipse, there's a belief. We would only say that, okay, please check whether that belief is correct or not. And I would definitely not get into an argument with somebody who is religious. No, that's not the right thing to do, because that might hurt sentiments.
Okay, Apeksha, please go on.
I feel that science should also be communicated to people who have a wide public reach, like politicians and actors, so that we might have less propagation of pseudoscience among masses. How can we work in this direction?
Well, your point is correct, that if the politicians became convinced of the kind of science that we are trying to propagate, then they have a better reach among the people. But what we see is exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
So that is the problem. And this the irrationality is being propagated in the society not because of some people believe in wrong ideas. It is being propagated as a concerted attempt, as a pre-planned effort. And that is why it becomes so very necessary for scientists to be vocal. So it is not that the politicians do not know the truth. Many politicians, I will not take all, I will not say all, many politicians, in spite of knowing the truth, propagate falsehood. So that's why it is a very difficult question that you are asking. In my opinion, scientists are better off directly reaching out to the people rather than politicians. Mainstream politicians, I mean.
Yeah, and that would also apply to public figures like actors.
Well, yes, among the actors, there are people who are perfectly rational-minded, and there are people who are not rational-minded. And if you can reach out to them, and if you can convince them, and they have a larger reach to the people, and therefore, yes, that really makes sense. Public figures, there is a point in trying to reach out to public figures, but I have a bit of misgiving regarding reaching out to the mainstream politicians. I can say that.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Anandarup, you had something to say? I saw your hand was raised. Yeah, please, Anandarup.
Yeah, sorry, it was just another clarification I was looking for. Sir, when you said that it's about the right to believe in whatever you want to believe, that I have some right to believe in, I have a right to believe in anything, whereas someone else also has the same right. But what if it causes active harm, my right or my belief or the other person's belief? Then isn't there a responsibility to delve deeper?
Yes, the active harm, what is active harm and what is not, is sometimes a subjective judgment. There are certain active harm that are proscribed, banned by our own constitution. Because of your belief, you cannot kill somebody. Because of your belief, you cannot, there are various things that are considered to be crime in our society, and you cannot do that because you believe in that. But the reason I say that everybody has a right to believe is that there's a question of in a monolithic religious country, everybody does not have a right to believe. But in a secular country, that right is granted. So if somebody is Muslim, somebody is Christian, somebody is Hindu, they have their right to believe. But science is neither Christian nor Hindu nor Muslim, and therefore science talks about truth that can be tested. All I'm saying is that everybody has a right to believe, all right. But it is our task to propagate what is truth and what is not.
Okay. Okay, so we are almost reaching the end of our time. I have one more question. So my question is about the boundary between cultural traditions and belief. So, for example, when a child will grow up, I can take my own example. Like when I was growing up, we have this festival of Durga Puja, and we often are curious to know like the stories behind like the Durga goddess and things like this. When we go to see the Durga Puja, we were taught to like do namaskar and things like this, and this act by in itself put some things in my subconscious mind. For example, I was I was thinking that if I don't do this, then something bad might happen. That is why I'm told to do this. So when we are growing up, we are young, we often are not given a proper definition of the boundary between what is a myth, what is a tradition, and what is a belief, or what is scientific and what is not scientific. So how do you think that while we teach young people cultural traditions, how to teach them in such a way so that they can have a very good idea of what is just a tradition and what is a belief?
So this is normally done by rational parents, because in society there are various practices, some of which are just cultural traditions, and some of these are embedded in one's religious belief. And there are families I have seen that who completely practice those cultural traditions. They would wear a proper sari on a particular day, dress up well. For example, during the Onam festival of Kerala, there are a lot of such cultural traditions that are done. They dress up in a particular way, they eat a particular kind of food, they decorate the places in specific ways. These are cultural traditions. So my submission is that slowly we have to weaken the ones that come from only belief, and we have to strengthen the cultural traditions. Similarly, in our Durga Puja in Bengal, there are a lot of cultural traditions that are unique. Every magazine brings out a special issue during the Durga Puja, which means people read more during the Durga Puja. Never seen anywhere in the world. A peculiar tradition, a good tradition. Most of the singers, they bring out their albums during that time. It's a tradition. It's a good tradition. But at the same time, there are also the traditions that should go down slowly as time progresses, that are actually causing harm. The practice of immersion of the idol in the Ganges is practically clogging the Ganges. So we should slowly get rid of these practices. So there are certain things that you should strengthen. There are certain things that you should slowly weaken, and it takes time. These are practices that have been going on for a long time, and therefore it takes time. But here we are discussing what the scientific community can do. It's what the scientific community can do is to strengthen the cultural aspects and to weaken the belief-based aspects. That's what we can do. And that is why in our institute, for example, when I was the Dean of Students Affairs, I was insisting to the students that every community, the Kerala community, the Bengal community, the students from Bihar, Jharkhand, they all have their own such traditions, right? From Odisha. The cultural ones you showcase on those days, but stay away from the ones that are not shared by others. That becomes sort of divisive. And that is what my submission is, that in academic institutions, we should try to steer away from such religious practices that are not universally followed, and we should rather focus on the cultural traditions and strengthen them.
Okay. Yeah, I was basically saying often the boundary between this cultural tradition and belief is not clear. And for example, so probably you are suggesting something like having a Saraswati Puja cultural function is okay, but not maybe the religious side of it.
I was sort of meaning like that, yes.
Okay. Anyway, we are almost done with our time. We are a bit over time. So finally, I would like to conclude this session and thank you, Professor Banerjee, again for this very fruitful discussion. Yeah.
Before you end, there are several questions in the chat from YouTube. Maybe you could take a couple of them if Professor Banerjee is okay with the time. Because I'm seeing several questions being pasted. One from Shonjit, one from Shuman Chakraborty, maybe one of each you could just pick up.
Okay. So Shonjit Chakraborty wants to ask that where would you like to place value in the fact-centric analysis of scientific conjectures?
Oh, well, I would put it this way, that in the various pursuits, various subjects that are called the arts, there are also values, and the subjects that are sciences, we also have values. In the main subjects that are considered to be arts, like sociology, like history, like linguistics, like psychology, all these are also very much science subjects because they follow exactly the same procedure in finding truth that science follows. But there is also literature, music, and areas like that where there is emphasis on value judgment, romanticization. That means what is good, what is bad, what is beautiful, what is not beautiful. There is judgment of that. While in science, there is only one judgment, truth judgment. So in science, we basically then, our value system is based on whether something is true or not. Our values are to propagate the truth. Our value is to propagate or to suppress, counter the untruth, the falsehood. That's our value system. So if this value system is propagated, then we'll have a better society. But at the same time, what I said as the pursuit of some art subjects, like the value of what is good, what is bad, what is beautiful, what is not beautiful, that also needs to, there has to be a healthy discussion on that in society, and that's also welcome.
Okay, so the next question is from Shuman Chakraborty, and he wants to ask that when some recent discovery is done, there is some uncertainty associated with it, but common people and policymakers need to be communicated about that uncertainty. So he asked, how confident should scientists sound while communicating to masses, while being honest regarding the current level of uncertainty in the available knowledge? Should we communicate with caveats?
My suggestion is not to communicate those things at all, because that often are taken by people in a wrong way. So if something is not yet decided, something is not yet certain, the scientific community has not yet reached a sort of, at least majority are agreed to that. Unless that situation is reached, it is not wise to disseminate that information to the people. I can tell you one experience that I had. Only a few months back, before the lockdown started, we had a 𝗣𝗍 program in our institute. And 𝗣𝗍 program is for the 𝗵𝗵𝘆 students, right? So they are the best from the 12th class and that kind of levels. And I gave a talk. Subhajit Bandyopadhyay was there at that time. I gave a talk on how did we come to know about this, the world around us. For example, I started with how did we come to know that the earth is round, and what is the radius of the earth, and how did we come to know how far is the moon, how far is the sun. So all that I went ahead, and I stopped at talking about the galaxy and many galaxies. And in the questions, some student asked about, can we start talk about wormholes? Now, I had never talked about wormholes in my talk, but this guy has heard about it in some newspaper article. Wormholes is not something that is mainstream in science. It's not something that about which a very clear idea has emerged. But yes, still it has reached him, a school student, through newspapers, and the newspaper, the author of that article in newspaper definitely does not know anything about it. So the students have only picked up the jargon. And then they are sort of starting to believe that this is established in science. Dark matter. Why should we talk to the common people about dark matter? We should not, because we do not know much about it. So my submission is that we should not talk to the common people about things about which we are not yet sure. But to the college students, we should talk about those, because they have to be told what are the open problems right now in science. And these are open problems, right? We have not yet decided. These are the ways people are trying to get the answer to that question, and students should be exposed to that. So these things should not be conveyed to the common people, but should be conveyed to the college students. That's my take on this.
Okay, so I don't see any more questions. So let us thank once more Professor Banerjee, and we conclude this session. So thank you. Yeah.
And I'd like to thank the organizers. Yes.
Excuse me, you need to take a group photo.
Yeah. Yes. So can you please turn on your video cameras? I don't see